If you haven't seen part 1, then you should go watch it, or else parts of this video won't make sense. Here are some shameless plugs. And yeah, let's continue with Shenmue III. I did not know what to expect with this game. Some people say it's exactly what they asked for, while others say it's a disaster. I just wanted a Shenmue game that felt modern and didn't have its moments of monotony and tedium. While the game had a supposed $20 million budget, Suzuki no longer had the backing of Sega and the development team was a lot smaller here. This means I may not be as harsh with Shenmue III as I was with its predecessors, but I'll still criticize its weak points. And the game has a lot of weak points. God, it's sad to say that I didn't like this game, and I can only imagine how disappointed some must have felt after waiting 18 years for this game. Is it a terrible game like many say? Terrible wouldn't be the word to describe what I think of Shenmue 3. More like, not good? Well, they mean the same thing. My problem is that despite this being a current-gen game, it's somehow worse than the Dreamcast games in a few ways. Also, before I delve into this review, yeah, this game stutters a lot. I thought it was a me problem, but no, after looking up this issue, it seems to be the game's fault that it constantly has this lag. I'll elaborate on that in a bit. But first, holy it hasn't reached the 2-minute mark yet. Holy defecation. Look at these graphics. It could be a recency bias as I was playing these beforehand, but this game looks so beautiful. Bailu Village and Niaowu are both jaw-dropping to look at. I was initially scared with how Shenmue would look in the modern age, but they did a wonderful job here. If there's one thing I can count on in the future entries, it's the graphics. They clearly know what they're doing in this department. I don't even mind the weird mix of realistic and cartoony character designs, as it keeps Shenmue different in its art style, and it has its own identity in the sea of beautiful looking graphics. Ryo still has his poker face, and that's all that matters to me. However, that's not to say the graphics are flawless. Somehow the animations still look stiff and even worse than the Dreamcast games in some scenes. In the pre-rendered cutscenes, the movement is fluid and realistic and the choreography is very alluring. In the regular cutscenes, the movement is really awkward to look at. And I'm not expecting anything incredible in these scenes, but the animation looks straight out of Shenmue 1 and 2. With these graphics, this jank is very noticeable. Shenmue 3 is not very well optimized either. As I said earlier, I thought the stuttering was a problem on my side. I thought my PC wasn't able to handle the game at its highest settings, so I lowered them, and it still stuttered. I genuinely thought my PC, a PC that can run Red Dead 2 no problem, was incapable of running Shenmue 3 at a smooth frame rate. Thankfully, it turned out that my PC wasn't the problem, because many other people also had this issue. The problem is that Shenmue 3 is loading in way too many things at once, and that's what causes these blips. This wasn't a problem in the Dreamcast games because they would only have one area loaded in at a time. If you wanted to travel to a different place, you'd have to wait for it to load. It's not ideal, but it kept Shenmue 1 and 2's performance consistent. Shenmue 3 doesn't have these loading screens, which is ideal, but it leads to worse performance. Honestly, I would have preferred it if the developers only had one area loaded in at a time. Yes, the loading screens would have added to an already tedious game. Oh, spoilers. But I'll gladly take that over inconsistent performance any day. Now then, the story. I liked it in Shenmue, I really liked it in Shen 2, I was severely let down in Shenmue 3. It's so short, bare bones, boring, and almost completely insignificant to the overall plot of Shenmue. At the start of Shenmue 3, Ryo needs to learn about the mysterious death of Sun Mingzhou and the meaning behind the mirrors. At the end of Shenmue 3, Ryo still needs to learn about the mysterious death of Sun Mingzhou and the meaning behind the mirrors. Ryo learns and accomplishes absolutely nothing in the story, other than 2 moves that we'll never see again. The plot here is somehow thinner than it was in Shenmue and derived from Shen 2. Yet again, we have to save someone to obtain information, this time being Shenmue's father, Yuan. In Shen 2, this objective is fine as we get a fun and action-packed story before that eventual payoff with Yuan the Zoo. In Shenmue 3, nothing happens until the very end, where the game has an undeserving plot twist. This game did not earn the moment to have an encounter with Lan Di, as there was no build-up, and it's one of the most anticlimactic showdowns ever. It made sense for him to be there in Shen 2 because we had been tackling the Yellowheads for so long, and we knew that they were handing Zhu over to the Chiyu men. It doesn't in Shenmue 3 because all we do is lose to thugs and then fight him. This game is a disaster when it comes to storytelling. Actually, Ryo does accomplish one thing: being pathetic. Throughout this entire game, all he does is get his ass kicked. Look, I know I said it's a good thing that they're building him up before he truly takes on Lan Di, but it's like he took 81 steps backwards here. This is the 3rd game in the series, and he still gets knocked out by lowly thugs. Come on, like, you're telling me that he can beat Dobby and Shrek, but now he struggles with a bootleg Street Fighter character. I don't expect him to be a god after 2 games, but he should at least competently take out these thugs with little to no problem. God, it's just so frustrating to watch Ryo struggle with people that should be seen as nothing more than cockroaches. It's the equivalent of Anthony Joshua getting beaten by Andy Ruiz. That never should have happened. I did not enjoy watching my protagonist get slapped around like a donkey for the entire game. People are mad that he didn't land a single hit on Landy, but he doesn't deserve to if he can't beat this lad after just clearing Shrek. He's also still a robot, but I'll show some examples in a second. As for Shenhua, what a waste of what is meant to be the main character alongside Ryo, but also, she's such an overpowered and unbalanced character. In Bailu Village, she does absolutely nothing for the entire section until this part. Ryo is unable to get any information out of Dollar Store Street Fighter until Shenhua pulls some magic out of her ass, and now your man is suddenly willing to talk. It was here where I realized Shenhua is literally Rey from Star Wars. Both possess the power of ass pull and can use this to move the plot. But this also raises the question, why doesn't Ryo use her for certain situations? Couldn't he have just brought her to the Red Snake's hideout and use her magic to defeat them? Why doesn't she use her magic when she's kidnapped? These are plot holes that the game never addresses and just hopes you didn't notice. When you begin to think about the story logically, you begin to realize how flawed it is and how it could have wrapped up ages beforehand. But the game only utilizes Shenhua's magic like once. Also, as a character, Shenhua is just as bad as Ryo when it comes to personality.
Hey, Shenhua.
We have to get to the village.
Let's go. Do you have any idea where your father might have gone?
No, I don't.
Is that the village? Up ahead?
Yes. Everyone lives up ahead. We can ask around. Someone's bound to know something.
Let's not waste another second.
Shenhua is up there as one of the most soulless voice actors. She's such a lifeless wooden character, and the only interesting thing about her is that, ooh, she's magic.
What is it, Ryo?
I spoke with Ka Jun Hao, the stonemason. He says the thugs attacked him too.
Oh no.
He's fine. Don't worry.
At least Ryo has a goal, so he's fairly compelling as a character. Shenhua is just an apathetic tag-along that barely contributes anything to the story, despite the fact that they've established her to be this magical and powerful character.
Ryo. See you later.
Here, fuck off, I'm buying capsule toys.
This one is interesting.
Thankfully, the absolute lad himself, Ren, makes a return to save the story. And he fails, because who the fuck can save this? Although he doesn't do anything until the very end of the story, it's nice to see him here. His appearance is just so random, but that does fit with the character as he was always doing that in Shen 2. Once again, his voice actor is the only person that sounds like he's trying, and Ren is still as witty and charming as he was before. It's a real shame he's not involved in the plot until the very end, but it was still nice to see him and Ryo team up once again. I'm not joking when I say I think I'd rather follow Ren than Ryo and Shenhua. Anyways, we also have the new characters introduced, such as Fisherman and Fatty. Yup, for some reason, while Shenmue III does introduce some characters, they're all one note and never reach that level of familiarity like the previous characters have. I swear Ryo talks to this girl once and suddenly she's important in the final act. You spar with Fatty like twice and now he's your best bud. It's not that I hate any of these new characters, but they're not given enough time and importance throughout the story until the very end, which doesn't give them enough time to be well established and seen as an ally of Ryo. It would be like if Wong in Shen 2 stole your bag and you never saw him again until the very end of the story. That wouldn't be enough to show why he's a major character in the narrative. And I think Shenmue 3 has this problem with its characters because the story feels rushed. It feels like Suzuki had a lot more planned for Shenmue 3's plot but had to cut content. The best example of this would be Feng Li. I'm just gonna say Feng Li. You see her a few times throughout the Niawu section. She obviously seems to be important, but absolutely nothing materializes. Then the game decides to do the plot twist where, whoa, she's actually this evil person. Unfortunately, this plot twist falls flat on its head for many reasons. Firstly, not once did we see this redhead before. How am I supposed to be shocked that this is Feng Li when this is the first time I'm seeing her real form? I know this is a weird analogy, but stick with me. This would be like if Atlas in Bioshock talked to you like twice, you never heard of Frank Fontaine once, and then they did the plot twist. It's executed terribly here in Shenmue 3. All the developers had to do was make Feng Li an important friend to Ryo, while also having scenes of her as Redhead without Ryo or the player realizing it was her. Then when the plot twist happens, it may shock the player. It's not that hard to do, like. But I feel like Suzuki did have that planned and was forced to cut most of it out, leaving this plot twist that lacks any sort of surprise and leaves the player saying,
okay?
I hope Suzuki had more planned for the Red Snakes as well, and didn't genuinely think an encounter with Lan Di was earned after doing nothing but losing fights for the entire game. The ending just came too quickly, and more should have happened beforehand. Flesh out these characters, have Ryo as involved with the Red Snakes as he was with the Mad Angels and Yellowheads, have him win a few fights, and then we might talk about a Lan Di encounter. See how I'm talking about the ending because nothing else happens in the story? Seriously, it's so dull that I don't know what else to mention. Nothing happens. Literally nothing. Pac-Man has a more fascinating plot. Oh, what a bad story. I wouldn't even call this a filler episode like many do, because at least you're watching dumb entertainment in filler episodes. In Shenmue 3, you're watching Ryo walk around, talk, and get beaten up. I don't mind if the story isn't as grand as Shen 2's, because I know the team was working with a smaller budget and staff, but if it's gonna be short, make sure it's also sweet. Thankfully, the voice acting is back to laughably terrible. As I said earlier, Shenmue and Ryo are prime examples, but some other people are also awful.
Howdy.
Granny.
Excuse me, Granny? Granny? She must be hard of hearing.
Lan Di's new voice actor makes him sound like a fiend named Melvin.
It seems you've improved a bit.
How am I supposed to take this character seriously when he sounds like he's going to tell the teacher on me? Anyways, moving on to the gameplay, which is traditional, but not in a good way. Shenmue 3 plays almost exactly like its predecessors and only has a few changes. Do you still talk to everyone while investigating? Yes. Do you still walk around everywhere? Yes. Do you still have jobs? Yes. Do you still fight? Yes. You think Shenmue 3 would have improved upon these aspects of the game so the game would be up to scratch with its contemporaries, but nope. It's exactly like the Dreamcast games. Look, I didn't mind nearly everyone being a signpost in the first two games because these were ambitious titles that were ahead of their time. Dialogue with every character was already a tough task, and adding conversations other than Ryo asking where sailors hang out would have killed the developers. However, technology has caught up and we now have games like Fallout New Vegas where there are huge amounts of dialogue with a massive range of NPCs. And yet, Shenmue 3 is over here with Ryo only having one dialogue option throughout the entire game. It's hard to feel immersed when people are only there to give you directions and nothing else. Now, the walking didn't think of it that much before. Going from point A to point B wasn't that bad because in Shenmue, the map is pretty small, and in Shen 2, the map was designed to have these shortcuts so these large areas wouldn't feel as tedious to travel through. However, in Shenmue 3, the map design is terrible. Bailu Village isn't too bad, there is the occasional long path to hide the loading, but the map is pretty small so it's never a trek to walk around. But Niawu, oh my fucking god. Just like Hong Kong and Kowloon, Niawu has a pretty sizable map, the only difference being that there are no shortcuts. Not until the very end of the game anyway. This means you'll be dragging yourself through the city just to ask someone if they know any kung fu masters. Some areas force you to walk so the game can hide loading as well, which only adds to the sluggishness. Niawu is pretty to look at, but it's a nightmare to walk through. And the addition of the health bar does not help. If you run, it drains your bar, which means you have to constantly eat. So in some parts of the game, I wasn't running because I didn't want to waste my health and stumble into fights with a handicap. I know it adds to the realism, but like I've said before, I only enjoy realism if it improves the game. A prime example of how slow the walking is and how boring the dialogue can be is when you need to get a Golden Goose VIP. To move the plot and reach the Red Snakes, you need to get a referral from someone. However, you don't know who has a VIP. So for about 10 hours, you're asking people if they know any rich people with a VIP. 4 eternities later, you find out that Gooseman may have a VIP. So now I have to trek all the way up to Gooseman just for him to tell me he doesn't have one. Then Ryo realizes this rich couple may have a membership, so now you have to trek all the way back to the hotel, go upstairs, knock on their door, they're not there, go downstairs, ask reception what room they moved to, go back upstairs, knock on their door, and do you finally get that referral? Oh, but it's not over. You have to trek all the way back to the Golden Goose and finally get your VIP ticket. Oh, for God's sake. Moving on to my next point, the fact that you still have to do jobs for hours upon hours just to get on with the story. Although, it is way better here than the crate lifting in Shen 2. Here you can chop wood or fish to earn money. These minigames aren't too bad, but it's still enough to make you want to bang your head off the wall if you have to collect a huge amount of money. In Bailu Village, you had to gather 2,000 yuan just to learn a move and chase chickens. That's a lot and a lot of wood chopped. Why does Shenmue continue to do this? The least they could have done was increase your wage to make these tasks a lot less tedious. It wasn't fun in Shen 2, and it's not any better in Shen 3. Stop adding this bullshit. On top of that, you may have to use some of your money to buy food as well, so that only adds to the amount of wood chopping you have to do. I mean, what is the point of buying these clothes when I need the money for the main story as well as food? Why? Now, anyone who has played Shenmue 3 might be wondering, well, what about in Niaowu when you have to raise 5,000 yuan? Yeah, that's a lot of money. However, the forklift driving has returned. Let's fucking go! I will gladly drive a forklift for 62,195 hours because it's perfect, just like it was in Shenmue 1. Or you could, you know, do these fights and collect a load of tokens.
Are you ready, sir?
Speaking of fighting, what in God's name happened to the combat? It wasn't perfect in the Dreamcast games, but it was simple and it worked. This was the kick button, this was the punch button, this was the throw button, and this was the dodge button. Press some buttons and flick the control stick to pull off some combos. Easy to learn, hard to master. In Shenmue 3, the combat is mash some buttons and hope something happens. The game literally tells you to do that. It's also impossible to time your move as there's a 20-minute delay with the button inputs. You're no longer able to hit your opponent when they're vulnerable because when Ryo finally performs the move you inputted, the opponent's weak spot is no longer exposed. It now comes down to luck on whether you'll land a hit or not. I set the difficulty to easy just because of this, and even then, some fights could be challenging because it would take ages for Ryo to finally land a hit. The thing is, the fighting wouldn't be that bad if there wasn't such a huge input delay, but because of this problem, the combat is awful. Like I said, I play this on easy, but I can imagine how frustrating it must have been on any difficulty above. Now, I'm assuming that the developers looked at this abomination known as gameplay and thought, it's just not shit enough. So, you know how Shenmue 1 and 2 had sprinkled RPG elements into their game? Well, Shenmue 3 takes it to the next level and adds grinding. Oh my god, they're gonna add random encounters to Shenmue 4, aren't they? Why? Why would they add another level of monotony to this already monotonous game? So in Shenmue 3, they now have levels for your attack and endurance in fights. Both of these combined make out your Kung Fu level. I thought the grinding was optional until I got my ass kicked. So I had to mash the A button for hours just to boost my endurance and pull off the same combos over and over to boost my attack. This isn't fun. Why do I have to grind just to fight some people? I don't understand how this improves the game in any sort of way. Instead of going into these fights with a strategy, I went in over-leveled and abused one combo. That rewarding feeling of beating a tough opponent is gone because all you have to do now is max out your Kung Fu level. So basically, they took the combat from the Dreamcast games and shat all over it. Massive shame, as it was one of the best things about those games. Somehow the quick time events are the worst in this game. The problem is that they are too fast. You need to have the reflexes of Manuel Neuer if you want to pull these off. It's a bit ironic because he conceded 3 goals, but anyway. This leads to an ungodly amount of trial and error in comparison to the Dreamcast games. If they were just a little slower, I wouldn't mind them so much, but my god, you need spidey senses if you want to get them on the first go. Are there any improvements with the gameplay? The controls are no longer tanky. Yeah, that's all I can really praise this game for gameplay-wise. Shenmue 3 either worsens the fateful gameplay or it has remained the exact same since Shen 2. That is far from a good thing. Someone please tell Suzuki to play some video games because this feels like a Shenmue remaster without any upgrades or fixes to the gameplay. Anything new that was added is unoriginal and complete cowpiss. They have made zero effort to reduce the padding despite the many people criticizing the previous entries for it. Shenmue 3 is the equivalent of a YouTuber who can't take criticism and never improves their content. You know what should be one of the worst parts of Shenmue 3 but ironically is one of the best? The nostalgia bait. It's not that bad when compared to something like Pokemon, but this game still likes to make you remember the good times from Shenmue 1, so you forget that you're playing a piss poor game. Where the nostalgia bait really shines in Shenmue 3 though is when you're able to call your old friends. I really should be criticizing this, but these interactions with the old characters are far more interesting than the actual game. I really enjoyed watching Ryo chat to the lads, and it even made me laugh a few times.
China? What are you doing there?
Goro, but I don't think it's a coincidence that we met. A lot of strange things have happened.
It's like destiny, Ryo.
Like, what?
She's the one, Ryo.
You know who really surprised me though? Nozomi. Yes, I am a firm believer that her new voice actor is far better than her old one. I cannot understand why some people are mad at this change. How can you complain that a character has gone from sounding like a piece of cardboard to sounding like an actual person? Am I missing something? Was I meant to enjoy Nozomi's lifeless voice acting in Shenmue 1? You can't tell me this isn't an improvement. Anyways, there's also the Shave Semu building. What? Anyways, there's also the Save Shenmue building, a museum of Shenmue's history, as well as a reward for the Kickstarter backers. It was really cool to explore this building, and it shows that while this game isn't very good, you can tell that the team behind it loves Shenmue and wants to see it succeed just as much as the fans do. But at the end of the day, Shenmue III is incredibly outdated and poor. The only way I can tell that this is a modern game is from the graphics. In terms of game design and gameplay, Shenmue III is still stuck in the late 90s to early 2000s. The fact that it still has its many moments of tedium is troublesome for the series. Shenmue III could and should have been the best game in the series by a country mile, yet nearly 20 years later, it has barely evolved. Instead, it has taken a few steps backwards and the game feels worse in some ways. I was anticipating what the next chapter had in store for Ryo and Shenhua, and all it was nothing. Nothing happened in Shenmue 3. You just walk around in Bailu Village and then do the same thing in Niawu, and then boom, Landi fight. It's a huge waste of time, and by far, one of the most frivolous video games that I've ever played. Thank God I'm making a video on this game, or else I would have felt so empty afterward. Now, at the start of the review, I said that terrible wouldn't be the word I would describe Shenmue 3 as, and I still stand by that, even after all of the complaints I just listed out. Because Shenmue 3 is not maddening or annoying. It's boring, dull, tedious, monotonous, repetitive, uneventful, sterile. If you combine all of these words together, you get Shenmue 3. It's such a nothing game. At least you feel something in a terrible game. Anger, but still something. You feel absolutely nothing in Shenmue 3 except for the odd laugh when you come across some awful dialogue. There is no point in playing this game when others have far better realistic functions, gameplay, and stories. Shenmue 3 is a literal Dreamcast game with modern visuals. I give this game a 3, and even then, a score like that feels too generous. But I gave it out of respect for the forklift driving. In conclusion, Shenmue is quite the experience. It's not something you're going to find anywhere else. Even games that were inspired by Shenmue in one way or another are completely different to the series. I don't regret playing these games. Well, maybe not this one, even if my scores declined for each new entry. Shenmue 1 and 2 are important pieces of video game history as they laid the groundwork for open worlds, clay models, next-gen graphics, and large-scale narratives for games other than Final Fantasy. Shenmue was a pioneer, and without it, we wouldn't have open-world games like Grand Theft Auto or Fallout. I have a lot of appreciation for Shenmue and its influence. I wish I could say the same for Shenmue 3. This is not how you make a better game while keeping it faithful. Resident Evil Remake is how you make a better game while remaining faithful to the original. It looks better, the controls are better, they added new moves, weapons, enemies, and areas, but it never strayed away from the established formula. Shenmue 3 looks better. Like I said earlier, it just hasn't evolved and its gameplay is stuck in the early 2000s. Its story is worse, its combat is worse, its map design is worse. If anything, this game has devolved. This game was made for the fans according to Suzuki, and sure, some people loved Shenmue 3, but others despised it. Not that the positive crowd is invalid, but most people simply say, oh, it's good because I loved Shenmue as a kid. Oh, it's faithful to the original, so it's good. While the negative crowd have actual reasoning as to why they think it's bad. For me and many others, Shenmue 3 isn't good, and I hope we never get a game like this again. But moving on, what about the future of Shenmue? Yu Suzuki has said that Shenmue 4 will happen, so probably a 2027 release date. I was originally going to say that I'd buy the game for the story and nothing else, but after doing some research, this follow-up could be a game that appeals to someone like me. The filthy normies, as my fellow Redditors would say. Oh my fucking god. Suzuki has said that Shenmue 4 will be more mainstream. There will be options such as fast travel and time skipping. This actually sounds very promising. If these are kept as options, this game could appeal to both the mainstream and the core fanbase. Shenmue is also getting an anime series. While at the moment it's only following Shenmue 1 and 2's premise, I think there's an opportunity here to reduce the amount of games that Suzuki has to make in the future. What I mean by that is they could have a season dedicated to one chapter and wouldn't have a huge effect on the overall plot. Therefore, when Suzuki makes Shenmue 4, the game can gloss over the boring stuff and get straight to the interesting stuff. But let's be real, they're not going to make it like the Clone Wars. Back to Shenmue 4, I was probably going to buy this game regardless because I'm genuinely invested in the plot, but I'm a bit more optimistic with this entry now. I just hope Suzuki can also deliver on a solid story as well as this supposed smooth experience. Just make sure you bring back the forklift drive. Thanks for watching my video, and those are my thoughts on the Shenmue series as a whole. Jesus Christ, this two-parter took ages to make. I would be so grateful if you could show your support by liking this video, commenting, and subscribing with notifications on. After this is uploaded, I'll be getting to work on my next video, so stick around if you enjoyed this. Anyways, I have nothing else to say. I'll catch you in a bit, and subscribe.